Aloha and welcome to another edition of DLNR Revealed, where we get to share with you some of the work that we do in the Department of Land and Natural Resources. I'm Christy Martin. I'll be your host for today. I'm actually with the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species, but we work so closely together that I really feel very special today that I get to share this particular story with you. And today I have two guests with me. We have Dave Cohen, who is the sea urchin hatchery manager, and we have Jono Blodgett who is the Aquatic Invasive Species Program leader, both with Division of Aquatic Resources. We'll call it DAR for short today. And so I'd like to start just by hearing a little bit more. What is the mission of DAR?
Well, the Division of Aquatic Resources, their main mission is to manage, protect, and conserve Hawaii's unique aquatic resources. So that includes the streams, the estuaries, the coral reefs, and all the little critters that live within it.
And you are the Aquatic Invasive Species Program leader. Can you tell
Correct.
me what your work entails? That sounds pretty interesting.
So aquatic invasive species, I mean, anything that shouldn't be here in Hawaii, we try to prevent those organisms from coming in. And if something does happen to arrive in Hawaii, we want to make sure that it doesn't get out and spread into other areas, and so we can control it.
So we're going to talk a little bit today about one particular project that you have. Your job duties are fairly immense. I think we want to focus a little bit today on Kaneohe Bay and the story out there. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Kaneohe Bay, I mean, it was referred to as the coral garden in the past, and there is still a lot of healthy coral. But the problem it faces now is there's an invasive seaweed that was brought back in many years ago and is starting to spread and smother and kill a lot of the coral reefs in Kaneohe Bay.
And when you say smother, we're showing our viewers some photos now. I think what that means is forming a very thick carpet over the reef. And what does that mean?
Basically, I mean, like it says smother, it just like you said, a carpet covers that coral reef, so it blocks out the sun, which the coral needs to grow, and then it also fills in all the little holes and crevices where the fish and crabs and octopus go in there to live.
Mm-hmm. And so this seaweed, since it's moving into Kaneohe Bay and covering this coral garden, it's decreasing habitat for fish and other creatures that maybe we as fishermen like to collect.
That's definitely true. Yeah, definitely.
So what are your methods for controlling? I mean, as a gardener, I go weed my garden. What do you do?
Well, we've partnered with the Nature Conservancy, the University of Hawaii, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And back in 2005, we built what we refer to as a super sucker barge. Basically, it's just a big underwater vacuum where divers will go down onto the reef, carefully hand select this invasive seaweed that's smothering the coral, peel it off, and then push it into the vacuum, and it goes up onto the barge.
And so you're physically vacuuming the reef of this seaweed, and so it goes up onto the barge, and then what happens to it?
There's another set of staff that is on top of the barge, and it goes onto this sorting table where the water drains through, and then the algae is collected on this table. And that's so just to look through, if there's any bycatch, little crabs or fish that comes up, we can make sure we put them back onto the reef. The thing is, I mean, there really isn't any bycatch that comes up with this seaweed, just because nothing likes to eat it, nothing likes to live in it, and so that's another reason why there's such a big problem.
Yeah. So can you tell me about how much seaweed you can remove using the super sucker?
It varies. I mean, different sections of the bay are in worse condition than others, but I mean, anywhere from 2,000 to 8,000 pounds of seaweed per day. So it's a very substantial amount. But the good thing is we're taking the seaweed and giving it to local farmers in the Kaneohe Bay area, and they're using it for compost and fertilizer. So turning something bad in the ocean into something good on land.
Well, that's a good story to hear. So does it work? Are you going to be vacuuming Kaneohe Bay forever, or? What's the plan?
The super sucker barge definitely is a very good tool to start off with, but it's not the final tool. We found out that in 5 or 6 months, the algae will just return after we remove all of it. So we kind of needed something else, and that's when some researchers have found that the native collector sea urchin is a very good potential species that can help control this invasive seaweed.
Well, I got to admit here, when I was an undergrad student at UH, we were the poor pigeons that got selected to do well, we volunteered actually because we were bribed with food, to actually look at the seaweed and snorkel it once, a transect line once every hour, 24 hours a day for a week period, just about, to see what was eating this seaweed. And I won't tell you how long ago that was, but back then, we really didn't see a whole lot eating it. So you're telling me that this sea urchin, this native sea urchin, actually does eat it?
Yeah. I mean, Kaneohe Bay, there's not a whole lot of, one being, this is an alien species, so it's normal species that eat on this seaweed in its native homeland. We don't have that species here. So, and also, Kaneohe Bay just doesn't have a whole lot of those herbivores that it did in the past. So what we're doing is helping to replenish that herbivore stock with these native collector sea urchins and help control this algae.
So I think that brings us to our next guest. Dave Cohen, you are the sea urchin hatchery manager, and it's your job to help Jono get some sea urchins. So can you tell me a little bit about what the hatchery is?
Sure.
And what it's doing?
The Sea Urchin Hatchery is located at the Division of Aquatic Resources and Nui Nui Fisheries Research Center. And our mission there is to breed the urchins in captivity, so we're not taking them from other wild areas in the state and depleting those areas for the benefit of Kaneohe Bay.
So you've been brought on board to basically raise sea urchins. So is that difficult?
It can be a little bit difficult. In the wild, sea urchins are naturally broadcast spawners. That means that they release their gametes into the water column, and with a little bit of luck, they find each other and they make a little sea urchin larvae. What we try to do is increase the odds in the hatchery. We take the parent stock out of the wild, and then we get them to spawn in captivity. We control fertilization in the hatchery, and about 1 to 2 days after the eggs are fertilized, they're free-swimming larvae. At that point, we transfer them over into a 200-liter tank. A couple days after that, they're ready for their first feed.
So, and then you feed them Twinkies, ho-hos?
Yeah, we do. We feed them Twinkies, and we feed them phytoplankton, which is single-celled algae from the ocean. We have to grow that as well down at the facility. We feed them twice a day. We change their water once a day completely. And after about 30 days of this regimen, they're no longer free swimming. They're getting ready to settle down and to start becoming a sea urchin and start their life as a grazer in the community.
So we're in just about year 2 of this project, is that correct?
Yeah.
And I remember when you came on board, and they handed you a nice, fully bound book on how to do this. Is that correct?
Oh no, that's not correct at all. There's been a little bit of literature. I had to do a bit of a search. There are a few people in the world that have been doing this on a research level. There's one commercial or one state-run hatchery in Japan, but the technology didn't really transfer quite so well to Hawaii, so we had to develop our own methods.
So you're sort of blazing a trail.
It feels that way quite frequently, yes.
Well, it's good to hear about your work. So you're raising these sea urchins in this hatchery, Anui Nui. I know Anui Nui used to be the freshwater trout producer or something like that to stock.
Right. Their trout has been produced there, freshwater prawns have been produced there. An awful lot of fisheries research has gone on at Anui Nui over the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. I think part of the story that DLNR likes to try and share is that they're always looking at the mission and trying to focus on the native species, the ecosystem, and the cultural aspects. So it was really amazing to see that this project start. So how many sea urchins are you producing?
Right now we're producing about 5,000 per month. We've been able to do that for the last 5 or 6 months. Production has been quite variable, but we're shooting for larger numbers than that.
And you're providing them to Jono.
Right, we provide them to Jono, and when I say that we've been producing about 5,000 per month, we're producing them at 15 millimeters in size. It's about a little bit bigger than a penny.
Okay.
And at that size, we decide that they're ready to go out into the field and start eating invasive seaweed.
All right, and that's what they prefer to eat. Is that correct? Or?
They seem to have developed a taste for it, yeah. These urchins are not only native to Hawaii, but they're native throughout the Pacific. And in their home range, the seaweed that is not native to Hawaii does exist in one of their home ranges.
Mm-hmm. So we don't have that same problem that Jono was talking about, where our native herbivores, our plant eaters in the water, like our surgeonfish,
Right.
don't recognize it as a food source because it hasn't been here long enough for them to actually have that recognition.
Right, but the native Hawaiian collector urchin does recognize it as a food source, and it likes it very much.
Despite the fact that it doesn't have eyes, so they're pretty amazing creatures. So Jono, what are you doing with all of these sea urchins?
Well, they're, like I said, Kaneohe Bay is, many of the patch reefs are being affected by this invasive seaweed. So we are working on 3 large patch reefs, with one of them being about 12,000 square meters large, and that's the smallest of the 3. So that's in comparison to about 4 football fields, so quite a large area. And so our goal, we went through, cleared the entire reef with the super sucker and removed all that, the bulk of that seaweed. And then after, we're putting Dave's sea urchins down, where our goal is to be about 2 urchins per square meter in order to control that regrowth, which in the past, there was reports of having 4 urchins per square meter in Kaneohe Bay. So we're just trying to revamp that population and bring it back to what it should be.
Do we know why the sea urchins aren't really numerous in the bay at this point? Does anybody know that?
We don't know the exact reason why. I mean, there's some thoughts that over the years, with the deteriorating water quality in Kaneohe Bay, with all the sewage that was deposited over the years, and then with sedimentation coming from the urban land side. And so a lot of that larvae, like Dave said, it's not an easy process to grow these guys. So they need specific cues and things. And so any larvae that come into Kaneohe Bay, the water quality or the sediment might be disrupting that process.
Mm-hmm. So you're placing these native sea urchins out on these patch reefs, and patch reefs, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're just like little tables of coral growing up out of the floor of Kaneohe Bay, and between there's big swaths of sand. So they're virtually marooned on these coral islands.
That's correct. Yeah.
That seems to be a really good research design for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, they aren't fish. They can't really just swim away, but they do have little 2 feet, little legs where they can walk around. So like you said, these little islands help kind of control them where we would like to keep them.
Mm-hmm. And we were taking a look at one patch reef early on when we first started talking about this, and you did an experiment on one patch reef where you cleared half of it and the sea urchins were put to work on that, and then you basically herded the sea urchins over to that cleared half and let the other half just grow.
That's correct, yep. So, I mean, we found very impressive results. The side that we did have the sea urchins on, they were able to control the regrowth of that seaweed to about 2 or 3%, where the side without the sea urchins, it grew right back to those beginning levels, about 35%. So it's quite impressive. You'd be swimming down through the center of the reef and basically be hit with a wall almost of seaweed that had regrown. So
these sea urchins do work, and you haven't seen these sea urchins really escape to other parts of the bay or anything like that?
No, yeah, not at all.
Well, it's nice and reassuring that it's, first of all, a native species, and we do know of some stories from history where Hawaiians used species like barracuda or kaku to control perhaps papio that got into their fish ponds. So I think that this is maybe one step further from that. It's nice to see a native species being used.
Yeah.
So now you're working on 3 new large 3 football field-sized patches of reefs. And And what's your hope? That's kind of a long project for you.
It is going to be a long project, yes, but I mean, ideally our hope is to restore those coral gardens of what Kaneohe Bay used to be, help kind of control this invasive seaweed, because I mean, it's not supposed to be here, so it's very competitive, and it's outcompeting our native seaweed, taking up all that space for all the octopus and other fish to grow, and then for the coral to grow as well. So hopefully by reducing this invasive seaweed, it'll allow more habitat for that coral and the fish, and then eventually, if it's a successful project, we'd like to expand out to other areas in the state that are facing the same problems, such as Waikiki, Malu Bay, and Maui. So,
yeah, well, it would be great, great to see some of that seaweed get under control using this technology, as it were.
Yeah.
So, how many sea urchins are you going to need from Dave? Are you putting out enough to do this job?
We're not even close. We've got a long way to go. We have a lot of expansion to do.
So, do you have enough space where you're working? What's limiting you in production?
Right now, there's some tricky parts to the life cycle in the sea urchin that are limiting us. We're trying to figure out a couple of spots when they're very, very small. When they're at about 500 microns, they're half a millimeter in size.
500 microns. Okay.
Yeah, it's a half a millimeter. It's very, very small. At about that size, sometimes they live, sometimes they don't. And so when they live, we get great numbers, and we're able to put 5,000 a month out onto the reef. And when they don't, well, we have fewer numbers. At this point, we're in an upward trend in the hatchery, and our goal by the end of the year is to be able to put out about 10,000 a month.
Wow, 10,000 a month. Okay, and your team can handle 10,000 a month.
We will make it happen.
How many people are on your team? What does your team look like?
We have a field team of 6 that runs the super sucker barge and outplants a lot of the sea urchins, and then Dave's team now consists of 4.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you work with students at any time, or what's your hope for ramping up? If you want to make it happen, how do you see that happening?
In the hatchery, like I said, including myself, we have a full-time staff of 4. We have a full-time intern and a young man who's volunteering with us for the summer. I think we can probably pick up some more interns. They'll be a great help. We're really going to need to increase our nursery side, which is the part of the grow-out cycle with the urchins from the time just after they've settled, which puts them at about a half a millimeter, up until they're about the size of a penny. And that process takes about 5 months.
Wow. Okay. And for you?
And I mean, we would like to get as many groups out onto the water as possible. I mean, Kaneohe Bay is not everybody gets a chance to see how beautiful its potential has. So, I mean, we'd like to get people out, get them underwater, and help us release some of these sea urchins and show them, that these sea urchins, we need to help protect them and conserve them and let them do their job out on the reef. I mean, we're producing quite a few, but not quite what we need to be, so each one is very, very special.
Well, I was blessed to be with both of you that day. We had the first release, and we want to give a shout out to the Kaneohe Canoe Club that came and helped us. I think that day place these sea urchins onto the reef. And our hope, I think, is to get the community, Kaneohe, as well as everybody in the state, sort of thinking about what they can do to help protect our resources. As we said at the start, this is your Department of Land Natural Resources, and really it needs to be a partnership for protecting these public trust resources. You guys are doing your job, but everybody has a little bit that they need to do. So what would you like to tell people?
Well, I think it's important that everybody remember that our watersheds run from the mountains to the sea, from Mauku to Makai. And it's important to understand that everything that we do on land can impact much of what happens in the ocean, even if you're not out in the ocean. Simple things like diverting your stormwater from your roof gutters into your garden rather than right onto your driveway or into the street. Cleaning up after your dog. Very simple things like that.
Well, I think people would be happy to see that regardless.
Right.
But that's good. Not everybody needs to go down to the bay to volunteer to help protect the bay, and little things that we can do at home. Sea Grant has a great publication on how to make a rain garden to help put that water back into the ground and perhaps even recharge our aquifer instead of having it run off. I think Kaneohe Bay has a really interesting history in that there's 9 ahupua'a that make up this region, Ko'olaupoko, that go into the bay. And if each of us in our areas really think about all of this that goes from the mountain down into the bay, I think your folks' job would be a lot easier, and I think all of us will be blessed with the returns that Kaneohe Bay gives us. Mm-hmm. So what else do we have to do?
Well, this invasive algae is very competitive, like I said. So if you go to an area such as Kaneohe Bay, Waikiki, Mauna Loa Bay, anywhere where you see this invasive algae, all it needs is one small little fragment to get stuck in your reef, in your booties, your anchor, anything like that. And if you go to another watershed and it just happens to escape, that has the potential to then spread into that watershed. So we ask that if you go diving or use your boat, and make sure you rinse it in the watershed where you came, just to make sure all that, if there is potential fragments of this seaweed, that it doesn't spread to another area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good point. We know that this smothering seaweed, Capophycus, is the main one you're working on with the super sucker. That was all the video we've been seeing. But also this other one that seems to be, it's really taken a stronghold in Waikiki. It's also present in Kaneohe Bay.
That's correct.
Gorilla Ogo.
Yeah.
And, anytime you happen to be down there and you pick up this big clump of stuff and little pieces break off, realize that can be a whole new plant. I think that that's something really good for people to learn, and even more important for us to realize how important to have creatures out there that are working 24/7, even on the tiny pieces like that, the creatures being the native sea urchins.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, this in between the little finger of coral, I mean, this algae is capable of growing, so we can't get in there with the super sucker. So that's where these little sea urchins and their little mouths will scrape away at that little fragment and help control it. So these guys are doing their job, and very important.
Well, it's a good thing we found that these work, and you're not working with the long spine Ina sea urchin. Collector urchins
a little
got
easier to handle.
Little tiny spines on it, and you can easily pick it up. And if you do a very gentle pet, you can do that. So thank heavens. I was reading an interesting study about the gorilla ogo on the reef behind the Waikiki Aquarium, and that reef, a lot of people may realize or may not, that it's a marine life conservation district, much like Hanauma Bay, where you can't take things. So back in the 70s, they did a study on this reef and looked at just the number of different types of species that they could find, and they found 60 different types of things. So different fish and different crabs and different lobster and different seaweeds, 60 different types. And then when they went back and looked at it again in middle of last decade, so 2000s, they found that really that ecosystem had collapsed down to 20 different species, largely dominated by the Gracilaria, the gorilla ogo, and this other invasive seaweed, spiny seaweed that came in probably the 1800s. So that really illustrates the need to intervene, I think.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, they're so aggressive and competitive, they'll push out all the native species, all the native limu that we like to collect and eat. So if we can prevent its spread and help control it, it'll be beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, I think our reefs are super important, and a lot of us realize that it's important when we go fishing, or maybe when we go snorkeling, but also when we think off into the future, there are storm protection, and they will mitigate against some of the storms related to climate change, or even just unusual storms. So protecting our coral and doing everything we can to do that, obviously, is super important. So are there any other things that we can do to help?
I mean, like I said, if you're out on the reef, make sure you clean all your gear. If if you see any of the sea urchins in Kaneohe Bay, be sure not to step on them or collect them or anything, because they are very important. But if you don't like going out in the ocean, go and volunteer with some of the other organizations doing great work in Kaneohe Bay. Kuko'oiwi, they're working on the wetlands and restoring some of the lo'i patches. And so what that does is that just helps kind of filter out a lot of that sediment from running from the Mauka to Makai. So it helps prevent it from getting out onto the reefs and smothering the reefs with that sedimentation. So go out and help with them, and or the fish pond. I mean, they're also battling this invasive seaweed, so go out and volunteer.
Paipai O'Heia has got a great volunteer program. They've got a great website. You can go and see what they're doing and participate. And we don't want to just make it Kaneohe Bay centric or Oahu centric.
No, definitely not.
Everybody's got a reef, you know, downhill from them. And there's things that we can do in each area. There's some great work going on, I think, on Maui, protecting the surgeon fishes and other herbivores to try and keep this in natural balance. So just look and see what's going on in your community and see how you can help with that.
And when you're fishing, it's important, just take what you need. Leave the rest.
That's a really good point.
You know, I mean, if we just take what we need, we leave the other fish in the ocean to increase the populations, and so we've got a nice firm breeding population out there in the ocean. That also helps to restore our reef community.
That's great. Thank you. And don't take the biggest.
Don't take
the smallest.
And don't take the sea urchins.
Don't take the sea urchins.
They taste terrible anyway.
Well, we'd like to thank you, Jono and David, for being with us today and sharing your excitement and projects. And thank you to the viewer for being with us and learning more about DLNR. Aloha.